gentlemen, it's Saturday morning. That means those two great guys full of information you don't want to miss. A veteran show for all veterans. Welcome Major Andrew White, retired, and Marine helicopter pilot Chuck Wright.
Hoorah! And welcome to yet another edition of Kilroy's Conversation. I am joined, as always, on every Saturday with my partner in crime over here, the one and only Chuck Wright over there. Chuck, how are you this morning, brother?
Doing good.
Excellent.
It's another great day in the neighborhood.
I like the rhyme. I like the attitude. It's good. It's fun. Keeps things going. Keep it real. Well, today another fun, exciting show. Got a lot of really cool things. Our little knowledge bombs are going to be dropping, but our primary focus today is going to be, of course, on we're remembering a day that probably one of the first time you could use this. Well, not the first, but definitely one of the earlier days, infamy in American history, and certainly in Texas history, the Battle of the Alamo.
Yes.
185 years ago today. It's just weird. We were just talking about it a few minutes ago before the show. Like, it's hard to keep that in perspective. 185 years ago, this great state really took its birth, if you will, to become what it is today. And it came from people like Davy Crockett, Jim Bowie, William Travis, and others that paved the way for what we have today.
What's interesting is 185 years later, and Texas is still the land of opportunity.
Oh,
and you see people voting with their feet constantly. They are leaving the Rust Belt. They are leaving the West Coast. They are coming to Texas. Jobs are here. Opportunity is here. The ability to create a business is here. So all of those things that those people fought for
and died
for. Yes.
That's
So if you don't know, March 6th was the day that the Alamo actually fell. It was the Mexican army of about 6,000 under the tyrant Santa Anna, a brutal tyrant, one of the worst military officers in world history. It reminds me a lot of Saddam Hussein.
Legends in their own mind.
Legends in their own mind, yes. Santa Anna referred to himself as the Napoleon of the West.
That's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah, the Napoleon of the West. And the funny thing was, he was not a very good general. But 6,000 troops against about 200. The actual number has been debated.
But nonetheless, if you're off by even a factor of 100, the odds were not
in the Texicans' favor.
Yeah, exactly. It was a brutal day, and we're definitely going to dive deep.
We're going to talk about the significance of the battle as it related to Sam Houston's tactical plan that caused a lot of angst in Texas. The runaway scrape would begin, and one of the things that the Battle of the Alamo did is it bought time to put distance between the Santa Anna's army and Sam Houston, taking with him virtually all the settlers to Texas.
Yep.
And they made a run for it. They just about ran out of Texas to all the way to a little bayou called San Jacinto, where today sits the San Jacinto Monument and the USS Texas. But about 4 o'clock in the morning, these 6,000 troops got online. They surrounded the Alamo and began to advance. And JP, if I can get you to throw up the picture of the Alamo itself, we will show our audience, and I've got to look back to a black screen.
That's
Okay.
all right. We're going
Give it a minute.
to. Well, JP's working on that, and before we go too deep in the Alamo, because that is going to be our primary focus today. As always in a show, we love to throw out a little bit of knowledge bombs of things that happened in history this day, because obviously the Alamo is the primary focus. But there was a few other events that shaped American history.
Tell us about those
Well,
events.
the first and one of the biggest is on March 5th, 1770. Another day that sparked another revolution, if you will, was the Boston Massacre occurred on King Street in Boston, Massachusetts, where 5 colonialists were killed by British regulars who were there and, exerting the king's will with taxation and, of course, the famous line, no taxation without representation. We all, which some of us may be feeling that with the way Congress is going today,
Yeah,
But,
get ready for those new tax increases, baby.
yeah, but we won't go too deep into that. But
You got to go out and earn that money that the government thinks is actually theirs, not yours.
Exactly, But other events that happened in history that, little fun stuff. On this day, do you know what famous, and we talked about this, I know you know the answer because we already talked about it part of the show, but one of America's most beloved, I can say we say music icons, he's up there.
Okay, you've lost me now.
Elvis, discharged
That's
out of the
right,
military.
Elvis got out of the Air Force.
Yeah, he's definitely
In
in
the
a-
Army. No.
Army.
It's Johnny Cash was in the Air
Yeah.
Force. Elvis was in the Air
Elvis was 2nd Armored Division,
Yep.
U.S. Army.
Yep.
And you know what? I got my hair cut at the same barber chair that he did up in Fort Chaffee, Arkansas.
There we go.
That's where he went, and kind of a cool little thing, So I could actually say I've got my hair cut in the same chair that Bill Murray got it in stripes when I went through basic training at Fort Knox, and at Elvis Presley when he was at Fort Chaffee in Arkansas.
There we go.
The little things in life that, make me laugh. But another thing, this week in history, another beloved American, I don't know if you call him a hero, but definitely
Icon.
Icon.
Yeah, we call him an icon.
Captain America was introduced in 1941.
Captain America. I didn't
Gotta
realize
love
he'd
it.
been out there that long.
Yes, 1941 is when Captain America was first introduced to the world. So, kind of a cool little thing, fun stuff to talk about that, while we talk about the serious stuff that happened in this world, we certainly need to remember, the importance, but the lighter part of history and what happened, these events, and, it's just cool knowledge bombs.
Cool knowledge
But
bombs.
more importantly, let's focus on the big part today. And like last week, as a native Texan, as a 7th generation?
Sixth and
Sixth,
seventh.
6th and 7th generation Texan. The Alamo, and being that you grew up in San Antonio.
Yep.
Let me ask a question. When you were a kid, was this day like that? Would schools close in San Antonio, or would you
No.
guys take trips? I mean,
No, in
I'm
fact,
curious.
it's almost disappointing to me. And obviously, there are events at the Alamo, and they make a big deal out of it. But for the most part, no. It's just kind of another day, and it's very sad. I watched one of those online specials. They were interviewing today's generation of kids. They literally have no clue about world history, and if you don't,
or American history. It is sad. I mean, I remember, and I know you do too, when we grew up, how many weeks did we spend on things like the Revolutionary War and what led up to in the Civil War and all that? These days, my kids went through U.S. history. They went through the entire Civil War in less than a week.
yeah.
And I'm like, how do you cover that type of information? That significant part of our history, it's being lost, and you are spot on.
Well, it's not being lost. Unfortunately, it's being reshaped into a new narrative that has nothing to do or little to do with the events at the time, but is being used to advance political agendas. We were
Agreed.
just talking before the show. They have canceled 6 of the Dr. Seuss books, and quite frankly, having kind of looked at the pictures in those, like, they kind of do have a point.
Yes,
But
but
the irony
content
is that Dr. Seuss, and especially if you go back and read Sneetch's, was all about inclusivity. It was all about stop worrying about how you look and start worrying about who you are. And so it was the message that you would think
Yep.
they were trying to get, that is trying to be promoted today, but it's not. They don't really care. It's being used as a crutch to prop up an agenda of, basically, for lack of a better word, it's power fight.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, the sad thing is at some point in time, events like the Alamo, I'll use your words, not forgotten, but grossly underappreciated in the
Yep.
educational system, where the significance of what these men did over those 13 days and prior to that, shaped not only Texas history, but really American and, to a certain degree, world history.
We're going to get to a map here in a minute. Our producer is right out of the studio.
Yep.
So we're going to vamp a little bit.
But that's
here.
okay, we adapt and overcome,
yeah,
improvise.
absolutely.
It's one of
But
those things.
We're going to talk about that because without, forget that Texas was its own nation. It was a true republic for a decade before it was admitted to the Union as a state. Forget about that for a second. We're going to show the map, and we're going to show what did this do to Western expansion. Had Santa Anna not torn up the Mexican Constitution of 1824, and Texas was not the only. This is another thing people don't realize. Texas was not the only state that rebelled, that said no. We fought, we threw out the Spanish. We don't want to be a dictatorship. We've done
Exactly.
that. We want to be, we want to be like the United States. And this goes back a step further. You were talking about the Boston Massacre, which would lead to the Boston Tea Party, which would be part of leading up to the American Revolution. This is one thing that's not being focused on. When you look at the entire world in 1774, there was not a single country that was self-governed.
No.
You have to go all the way back to the Greek city-states, which is almost 2,000 years, 1,1700 years beforehand, to find anybody who had even attempted self-governance. So we take this so much for granted, and we don't understand that even today, only half the world is self-governed.
Great point. We've always heard the expression, the American experiment. Well,
Yes,
it
very
worked.
much.
But at the same token, people don't realize how how many times in history that experiment almost failed.
Oh, yeah.
And,
1812, it didn't take too many more years.
Exactly.
They tried.
This country is resilient beyond resilient. And the things that we did, and it's events like the Alamo
Yes,
that,
very much.
defines that resilience of America. You want to talk about a kick in the gut, people don't realize also the strategic importance of San Antonio at that time and the importance of holding that, defending that for the western part of the country and going on. San Antonio was the gateway.
It was, but there wasn't anything west of San Antonio.
But that defined
even
where
at
we
that
go.
point in time, California was not heavily settled. And let's, since we're kind of doing geography, throw up the map if you would, JP. So I want our viewers and our listeners to have a picture. That gray area is what Mexico owned and controlled at the time. Now,
That's
the interesting thing, and I will make this comment, because I have heard the remark, oh, the Texans stole Mexico, or stole Texas from Mexico. Well, okay, fine. We didn't just kick your butt once, we kicked it twice. But I will make this comment. None of this land highlighted in gray was settled by the people of Mexico. This was all claimed by the Spanish. This was all claimed by the Spanish. This was all their expansion, is they thought they had the right to claim the entire world. That really represents Indian country. And the Indian country is important because the reason that that south of the Rio Grande were some huge Mexican cattle ranches. And the reason that the Mexicans agreed to allow people to settle Texas was literally to create a buffer.
Yeah, that's right, for the Comanches.
Between the Comanches, who were absolutely brutal, although great cavalry fighters. They may have been the finest cavalry fighters of all time. But they were creating a buffer between those cattle ranches and the Comanches. So that was their purpose to it. But if you look at that map and you look at this huge swath and a lot of that where it says unorganized territory, that is land that was acquired largely through the Louisiana Purchase. But nobody was out there. Nobody lived out here. There was
Our country was still very
Yeah.
infant at the time and growing, but
the Indians roamed, the buffaloes roamed, and I mean, literally, they had herds of buffalo that you measured them not by the number of cattle, but by square acres that they covered.
Exactly, and
they're gone.
I know I've been out in the Dakotas, and you see the pictures of what it used to be like. But we'll be talking about that in another show. Let's refocus back on to the Alamo. Now, today is the day that the Alamo finally fell after 13 days
A
of
13-day
siege, bombardment. Overwhelming odds beyond. Like I said, the actual number of defenders is still in question, but
JP, would you throw up the picture of the courtyard of the Alamo?
like we were talking about earlier, even if we were off by a factor of 100 or more, they had no chance whatsoever against the Mexican army
And I forgot
at that time.
Laser pointer.
I guess my question would be and I guess there's more battle way. If Sam Houston had gotten the message in time, could we have raised enough troops to have defended against that? I don't know.
Probably not. So we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about the power of the runaway scrape, a tactical move that has a mistake that armies continue to make, be it Napoleon at Waterloo, but we'll talk about you don't want to extend your logistics and supply lines too far.
That's
So let's
absolutely.
talk about this. This is the battle itself. This is a rendition of that morning. So in the top center of the picture, that's the Alamo. And you will notice it doesn't have its famous dome on top of it.
Why
It
is that?
didn't at the time.
Really?
Yeah. That was a piece that was planned but never completed.
Okay.
And it was completed after the fact. But that courtyard is the courtyard that is in front of the Alamo.
So, Chuck, let me ask you a question because
Sure.
this helps for obviously. By the time I came down to Texas, the Alamo had long changed, and unlike many battlefields that I've visited, the battlefield of the Alamo is right in downtown San Antonio. I mean,
Yeah, it's
like
surrounded by a city.
cities, hotels,
Yep.
bars, nightclubs, all kinds of things. So, walk me through as where you talked about what is the Alamo as I know what most people today is
the
in that center.
chapel is in the top center, a little bit leaning to the left.
Right.
If you go all the way to the, if you would follow that line out to the right as you're looking at it, you're going to find the Menger Hotel. The Menger Hotel would become famous under Teddy Roosevelt.
Right.
That's where
It's
he
haunted,
would recruit his-
supposedly.
Huh?
Haunted.
It is haunted. It is haunted. It is a great old hotel. It's awesome. That's where he recruited Rough Riders.
But
So this, which is that south wall,
Right.
and you can see how much area. That's another thing that we wanted to put the picture up to get the visual of how much area 200 men had to defend.
that's huge.
Yeah. There is another. The San Juan mission is further south in San Antonio.
That's still standing, or
Oh yeah, that's still standing. Its walls are thicker. It is smaller in size and in scope than this huge courtyard here. And there is, some have said, well, what if Travis had thought to relocate there and defend San Antonio from there, Plus, he would have caught the Mexican army a little bit sooner. Not much, maybe a half a day or something, but that would make a lot more sense. It would have been easier to defend. But to
The results
point,
probably would have been the same, though.
at that time, yeah, the results, at the end of the day, the results would have been the same. And this becomes important. So what if the men from Goliad had come to reinforce it? Well, they would have done a lot more damage. It is possible they would have turned back Santa Ana with more men, with more guns. The Texicans were using, and we've talked about this, and we're going to get into a little bit of a combat tech. The Mexican army was using muskets, which fired kind of like a shotgun, except they were firing off single shells out of it. Most of the Texicans were fighting with Kentucky rifles. They were referred to with rifles because the inside of the barrels had rifling. They were much more accurate. They would fire a longer distance. So it gave a tactical advantage that literally was just overwhelmed. And being overwhelmed will come into one of the great controversies of the Alamo. And we're going to show a clip from the movie The Alamo that I don't know if Davy Crockett went out this way, but by golly, it makes for a great story.
Exactly. And we, like I said, last week, we talked about that where, there are still some historical aspects for right, wrong, and different purposes of, what do they say? History's told by the victor.
Absolutely.
And of course, we like to, talk about how we wanted our heroes to go. And no question, Davy Crockett is an American iconic hero.
So, 4 o'clock in the morning, the battle begins. It's over in 2 to 3 hours. It did not take long. Basically, what happened is the Texicans were just simply outnumbered. Crockett had ridden into the Alamo the week before. He had come down from Texas with about 30 men. Oddly, he only went to the Alamo with about 6.
Now, question with that. Was he dispatched to the Alamo? How did he... he knew there was some issue going on in the Alamo. Was there a reason that drew him?
I do not know, other than the fact that this is where the Texans were going to try to make a stand. Now, we'll do this clip. So basically what happens is the walls are overrun just by overwhelming numbers. Now, if you buy into the John Wayne version of the movie The Alamo, then Davy Crockett is killed on the north wall, defending and swinging, and they kill him. The odds are there were more than a few people, and was Crockett one of them? We don't know, that were literally just overrun. Because it took a while to reload an old Kentucky rifle. But this is one, and I love Billy Bob Thornton anyway. This movie was so much more historically accurate. The second version of the Alamo did not have a lot of critical success, but they took great pains to make it historically accurate. And let's just watch this version of maybe this is how Crockett met his end.
Through yourself on the mercy of His Excellency Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. Yes, Santa.
Were dumped into a pile. This was Santa Ana's way of showing great disrespect.
So tired so often, look at this banana.
Yep.
And they were burned. And so now there is a monument down there with most of the names etched in. They fear there are still people they don't know who they were that were there.
And again, it'd be hard to know because some of the Tejano, regulars that came over there to defend may not have had records for them, along with some of the volunteers that made it over there that heard the letter, Travis's letter came in. They may not have been documented. Again, like we said earlier, we could be off by a factor of 100 or more. It would not have made a difference because...
It wouldn't have mattered in terms of the outcome of the battle. So, 2 terms we've used. We've used Tejanos and we've used Texicans. The Texicans are what they refer to as the settlers that came from, mostly from America, but from Germany, from Ireland, and from Europe. And the Tejanos was those that were living in, so men like Juan Seguin and his father, who had lived in and settled in Texas. They were originally Mexican citizens, so the difference is where you originally were a citizen of, but in fact fought for. And I'm gonna blow his name. I'm not even going to attempt it because I'm really bad at it. There was one individual, an incredible footnote in history, who was actually born. Remember that the Alamo was a mission. Right. He was born in the Alamo and would wind up dying there, fighting in the battle. So we talked about, let's talk for a second about what was happening tactically. Sam Houston knew his army wasn't big enough and wasn't strong enough to stand and fight Santa Anna's army. Plus the fact there was another Mexican army of about 2,000 that was coming up, tracing the Gulf Coast, coming up out of Brownsville and Matamoros.
Right.
And that was commanded by a general by the name of Yurley. And one of the reasons, I think I pronounced that correctly, one of the reasons that Santa Anna was not killed at San Jacinto, even though a lot of people wanted him to be killed, they wanted to string him up, was that they were afraid that if he was dead, then Yurley would continue to advance. So what happens is San Antonio is kind of in the south central portion of Texas, for those that don't know. Sam Houston collected everybody that he could and began the runaway scrape. And he began moving east. For one thing, he felt he had an obligation to the citizens, the men, the women and the children particularly, of the state of Texas. And so they began moving east towards what we now know as Houston, and they kept moving east, and they kept moving east. And one of the things at the time in Texas, being spring, when the rains came, the rivers flooded.
Yep.
We didn't have lakes back then. We only had one lake at the time. Bonus points if you can name the only natural lake in Texas.
Lake Cato. Or did I pronounce that correct?
Yes, you are correct.
Yeah. Didn't think I knew that.
Yeah, very good. I'm very impressed. All the rest of them are man-made lakes. But the rivers would become engorged, and one of the things that would happen, it would prevent or slow down Santa Anna's army chasing Sam Houston, because Santa Anna knew that if he did not defeat Sam Houston, there would be continued unrest.
And he could not afford that because, you know.
Yeah. So, and it was actually a tactical move, because what Sam Houston was doing was not only gaining strength in his army, but he was also stretching out the Mexican army and their supply lines. And there were a couple of skirmishes along the way where the Texicans were able to do damage, and they began to pick off. So not only was Sam Houston's army growing as more men came to the fight, took up arms, but at the same time, the Mexican army is slowly getting smaller and smaller and smaller.
And when you're marching an army for that long, they also get worried, and morale starts to fade.
Exactly. So they just about ran out of Texas. They pretty much had hit the Gulf. And the Mexican army was camped out at a low spot in the bayou of San Jacinto. And and Sam Houston said, "This is it. This is where we make our stand." And they had gotten tired, and to that point, they actually were caught in siesta.
And I was just about to ask you that, like, with that battle, now we've seen the movie aspect of it from that movie, The Alamo. And I don't know, now I know the battle only took roughly about 18 minutes.
Okay, so we've jumped from the Alamo. We have gone about 7 weeks into the future, and it will be April 21st. And it's easy for me to remember. That's my wife's birthday, so we have a lot of fun on San Jacinto Day. But yes, you're right. 18 minutes is all it took to rout the Mexican army. And at that point, in between there, we had the massacre at Goliad. They called it a Battle of Goliad. Fannin gave up for some reason. History will never give us a good answer for why, in a highly defensible, with almost twice as many men in a highly in a much more defensible situation, he just surrendered. He could have done some real damage to the Mexican army, but then they took them out and murdered them.
Yep.
And so there was a lot of bloodlust with the Texicans when they were out of the Mexican army, just because. And a lot of it was Santa Anna was a brutal tyrant.
And certainly proved to be quite the coward in the end.
Quite the coward.
He was, if my memory is correct, and please help me here, he was found wearing a woman's garment, or was he wearing enlisted?
No, he was disguised himself as private.
A private.
And when they found him, they couldn't believe that. What tipped off the Texicans is the deference that the other soldiers paid to him. And eventually they looked at it and said, okay, this isn't right. And then they figured out who it was. And members of the army were calling out, oh, Excellency, Excellency. So,
kind of dead giveaway.
Yeah, kind of a dead giveaway. He did like to strut around like a peacock, as you could see from his uniforms. It was a fascinating behind-the-scenes look. And I hated that the movie didn't do better at the box office. But if you read about the vision of the producer to create a movie that was very, very historically accurate, he said it, unlike the John Wayne version, which was set out in Brackettville, which is way out, really in West Texas, where the ground is, it's more desert.
Right.
San Antonio is not desert. It is low-lying mesquite trees. It is green, although I wouldn't necessarily call it lush. Although it would have been lush in March.
Right, and back then, you know.
So, but they made sure that the scenes of the Alamo, they made much more historically accurate. The costumes, the uniforms, they did a lot of research on it. So it was very, very interesting from that standpoint to watch the movie. And of course, it's got Billy Bob Thornton in it. You can't go wrong with Billy Bob Thornton. Just an incredible actor.
Like you, one of my personal favorite, I mean, so many wonderful lines. But, let's talk about, like I said, we'll go to San Jacinto. We're going to flip back a little bit to the Alamo. The defenders over there. We all know, and we've talked about this before, Travis. He commanded the regular military. Right.
So what happened is Jim Bowie was already at the Alamo and he was in charge. Sam Houston sent Travis to the Alamo, put him in command of the Alamo, which didn't go over very well, quite honestly. Bowie had a little bit of an ego.
But there was another colonel in the movie, and I don't remember the name. There was a colonel that Travis was second in command, but that colonel left to go.
Yes, that is correct. So Travis was actually, and I said that poorly, right. Travis was actually the second in command, and then that colonel left, and I forget his name too. Bowie balked at the idea. Travis was very young. Bowie balked at the idea of putting his men under Travis, and so they compromised and agreed to a separate command. But Jim Bowie was also extremely ill at that point in time. Actually did not participate in the battle. He was bedridden. And that part is true. They also believe that his famous Bowie knife, which was copied, was kind of a short machete,
right,
was actually taken to, and they believe that and the flag that was flying over the Alamo are in Mexico in the archives. The flag has never been returned. JP, would you throw up that 1824 flag?
Mm-hmm.
This was the flag that was flown in the movie, the John Wayne version of the Alamo, the 1824 flag. And the significance of this, as I mentioned before, the Mexican Constitution of 1824, which, just like our Constitution does, protects the rights of the citizens. Mm-hmm. And as I mentioned, when Santa Anna tore that up, Texas wasn't the only state in Mexico that rebelled. Texas was the only one that was able to pull it off because the Mexican people did not have weapons. One of the first things that they did after the war with Spain was over, they started confiscating weapons.
Where have we heard of that in history?
Yes, exactly. So it's kind of interesting to talk about that. But this flag, it has been said, actually did not exist. That the flag that flew over the Alamo had 2 stars on it. I'm not sure the significance of the stars. We'll never know.
Do we have an image of what that flag looked like anywhere?
No.
Or it's just in historical
terms.
terms?
And that the segue that I wanted there was that much of the information that we have about the Battle of the Alamo, we didn't have cameras, we didn't have videos, we didn't have things like that. So much of this information comes from the diaries, particularly of the officers, because a lot of the Army privates, enlisted personnel couldn't read; they were illiterate, and specifically. The general, the Mexican general begging for Davy Crockett's life, he was smart enough to realize, don't kill Davy Crockett. The man is a U.S. hero. He is somebody people will rally behind. Was absolutely correct. It was a terrible faux pas on Santa Anna's part, but again, it spoke to his arrogance. That actually comes from a Mexican officer's diary, but it's kind of an offhanded reference to it.
Right.
He doesn't go into a lot of detail on it. So we've been able to glean some of the history, literally from the survivors, but as you said, from the victors come the history.
I mean,
of,
there was no
yeah.
Alamo survivors, you know.
Well, there were in that.
But those are the women and children.
Women
right?
and children. One of those being Susanna Dickinson. I've actually been to her house in Gonzales, been by her house. I have been by the tree. In fact, a friend of mine, his kids jumped the fence. There is a tree under which Sam Houston gave the orders for what we would then call the runaway scrape. And I have a couple pieces of bark from that tree. Now,
really?
the kids didn't pull the bark off the tree.
I was just about to say.
It was laying on the ground. It was laying on the ground. They were picking up litter.
Okay, all right. Just
but
want to
yeah,
make sure.
I have those framed now.
You want to make sure you weren't self-incriminating yourself. You know?
Exactly. Yeah, it's on private property. It totally lost my train of thought there for a second. Sorry about that. But what the Alamo did. So in a couple of things, a couple of historical footnotes. Sam Houston actually sent Travis an order to abandon the Alamo because he knew they couldn't defend it, particularly with that few.
When was that sent? I mean, that's actually something history I did not know.
Yeah. So Travis ignored it. Travis wrote his letter, and basically his response was a little bit to Sam Houston, too, and said, no, we're going to stand here. We're going to stand here and fight. Sam Houston could not in good conscience give an order to his people saying, look, I need you guys to commit suicide to buy us time for the runaway scrape. So there was a little bit of, even as a very young man, Travis had an understanding of not necessarily what Sam Houston wanted, but what Sam Houston needed. And very much they needed to buy time, and that time would pay off because by the time Sam Houston got to San Jacinto, his army had tripled in size. They had been able to spend at least a few days doing some rudimentary training, military training, and then tactically they just absolutely devastated the Mexican army, which had failed to put out, surprisingly enough, pickets, basically sentries that would be out to alert them. Not that it probably would have mattered much.
Because, I mean, obviously they were caught completely by surprise.
Completely.
And that led a lot to the fact that it only took 18 minutes.
Yep.
And from what I've also read in history, the Texas losses were minimal on that.
Yes, I should have pulled the numbers up, but yeah, very, very minimal.
I mean, almost, if you ever want to call it a perfect battle,
Yeah.
that would have
would be
been
the one.
as close to a perfect, flawless
Yep.
battle plan. That was it. I mean,
That was very much it. So, a couple little historical footnotes, and I'm going to do one personally. You referenced my great-great-grandfather. So the interesting thing, I'm a 6th and 7th generation Texan. These are direct descendants. These are both great-great-grandfathers.
Right.
James J. Ross was actually with Andrew Jackson at the Battle of New Orleans.
Right. And I remember you've mentioned that.
Yep.
Now, did you have any family that was at the Battle of San Jacinto?
Yes. So Daniel Byrd is my great-great-grandfather on my grandmother's side.
Right.
Yes, on my grandmother's side. And he was supposedly at the Battle of San Jacinto.
Mm-hmm.
I do know the Texas Historical Association has documented that he rode with as a Texas Ranger with Jack Coffee Hayes. I do not know if he fought in the Mexican-American War. He was a sergeant in the Texas militia during the Civil War, and he fought in the Civil War, and then he would return to Texas to the area around Junction and would remain in law enforcement for the rest of his life. Lived to be 80 years old. Very unusual at that point in time.
Yeah, that time in American history, that was
unusual.
grossly
Life
uncommon.
expectancy was in your 40s somewhere.
Yep.
So he lived a good long life. He did a lot of things. Some people might hate him for fighting for the... I know that's part of the cancel culture today. I can't buy that. And I get, we want to make these people bad and evil, and we want to cancel them. Those who fail to study history and respect
doomed
history
to repeat
doomed
it.
to repeat it.
And pick up a history book, and you'll see all the times that has happened. And that is, it's well documented that if you don't learn it, you'll learn it the hard way.
Yeah,
And
you will relearn it the hard way, and it is a path that I fear our nation is sliding down today. Is we're so busy canceling, and we were joking about Dr. Seuss earlier, and we're going to go a little political here, but what the heck, we're political.
Yep.
Now,
It's our
the
show.
interesting
We can
thing,
do what
I
we want.
actually, and having done a little bit of studying, we're making jokes because I put it on Facebook, a picture of Michelle Obama a couple years ago reading Dr. Seuss with a bunch of Dr. Seuss characters to a bunch of kids. Dr. Seuss was a visionary before his time. He talked about, and we talked about the book Sneetches, which was very much, you had your star-bellied Sneetches and your Sneetches without stars, and then they created a machine that put stars on the Sneetches, and they'd go through, and then everybody had a star. So the star-bellied Sneetches, the original ones, took their stars off, and then going back and forth, and it was the absurdity of judging people by the color of their skin. I'm going to quote Martin Luther King, and I've been told I'm not allowed to do that. I'm the wrong color, but I'm going to do it anyway. Because this is absolutely brilliant. That I have a dream that one day my 4 children will be judged by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin. And let me give you a news flash. If you don't know this already, I don't care who you are. Doctor, lawyer, Indian chief, Jew, black, white, Muslim, Hindu, doesn't matter. Pick any group. There are going to be good people and there are going to be bad people in that group.
no question about that.
There is nobody who is immune to this. There is no, it's just reality. And thus, Martin Luther King's words, judge people by the content of their character. And this makes it difficult because guess what that does? You don't get to judge people as a group. You're going to have to take a look at each individual and go, good person, bad person. And you know what? I'll bet there's some good and bad in all of us. So it's not that easy. But the other thing Dr. King said, and we need this now more than others, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that.
And I agree with you on that. And again, not to turn everything all political, but we're not perfect people. Full disclosure, I've got flaws in my life, and I know you do too.
No, you don't have any flaws. Come on.
But you know what? It's your overall content of who you are in the big picture. We're human by nature. We're going to make mistakes. Of course, our wives will tell us that they don't, but that's a whole nother argument for another time, you know.
And what's funny is, for the audience that doesn't know us, we actually are blessed to be married to a couple of absolutely incredible women.
Okay, so I don't have a microphone in front of me because they took it away from me. But Nathan says cancel culture has no place anywhere. Don't apologize.
Nathan, thank you very much, sir. Which Nathan is that? Is that
Nathan Wynn?
Okay.
You have a new listener.
New listener,
All right.
love it.
Outstanding.
Welcome
Nathan,
to the
welcome
show.
to the show. Glad you're here. Couldn't agree with you more. I've got a nephew that is Nathan. He's out in Montana, recently married, and I hope he's doing well. So,
but the bottom line is, we got to accept people for who they are, not what they are in regards to things they have no control over. No one can choose well, I guess in science today you can choose your sex or, color of skin.
Let's not even go there.
But
that's so confusing.
We'll save that for another time. But the bottom line is, and again, I know we've completely strayed away from the topic of the Alamo, which, but then again, these folks at the Alamo and throughout history laid down their lives so we could have the country, the freedoms, the ability to do the things that we have in this nation. It's important to remember that, this history that we're trying to tear down is the bedrock and the foundation for who we are as a country.
Yep, absolutely.
And if we don't preserve that, educate that, learn from that, like we said just a few minutes ago, the painful reality is we will repeat it and we won't be prepared. At some point, we literally will not be prepared to handle that. And that's when bad things start happening, because pick up a history book, a real history book, not the ones that have been rewritten to eliminate that. See what happens to some of these cultures across the globe that allowed it to be repeated.
Absolutely.
Where are those societies today? They're gone.
They are gone. And this, we are the shining city on the hill. We are a beacon for the rest of the world.
And keep in mind, we are not a perfect nation either.
No, we never have been. But you know what we do? You know what we have done throughout our history? You're right. And I have no problem admitting the Texans, we weren't the best neighbors to Mexico.
Full disclosure.
Let me clue you on something else. Some of the Mexicans, some of the Indians that we try to make heroes now, they weren't good people either. Oh, my God. You want to talk about brutal? The Comanches make Hitler look like a Boy Scout.
Yeah,
These were... And it was a different time. Put it in context of the time. Just does not justify it, does not excuse it. But, and this is probably when we'll talk about cancel culture for just one more second. This is my biggest frustration. We have an entire movement out there that isn't doing anything. They don't have a solution. So my brother talked to me at one point in time. He said, you got three kinds of people. Said, you got problem identifiers. Look, problem. Okay. You got problem admirers, and you're in the government. You work for the government, and you know there are people who have made entire careers about studying problems. Oh, look at this! Well, we're going to examine it. We got to have more data. Let's get more data. Let's do a study. Let's do this. Let's do that. And I joke, but climate change is a cottage industry, a multi-billion-dollar cottage industry where all these academics are getting paid to do studies. They're admiring the problem, but the smallest group of people are those that can solve problems. So
or want to solve those problems, it's true. Yes, JP.
So Nathan says all societies and governments have one thing in common. Even the greatest and most powerful in history have all risen and fallen. Let that sink in.
True statements.
Very true.
We got to have you on the show one day.
Yes, absolutely. So hopefully we're not going to fall into that very point. Thank you, Nathan, for getting me back on topic. So you have this small group of problem solvers. And the one thing that I want to hear more of out there from all of these groups, it's fine if you want to condemn and you want to cancel. Bring me solutions, and I can do this. This is the interesting thing. I have talked to some of these groups. Andrew knows that I work with several organizations that work with solutions, specifically with our veteran homeless problem. But we support a lot of groups that are working with veteran suicide and things of that nature. Now, obviously, I gravitate more towards veterans, but I am actually...
everyone's got their cause.
Yeah.
Everybody has their cause. And let's face it, there are a million great causes out there. We're one person, one organization, one group. We have to pick and choose because we can't take them all. But, to the point that you're saying over there, and I think it was Teddy Roosevelt, I could be wrong, complaining about a problem without a solution is simply whining.
Yeah, I don't know if that's Teddy Roosevelt or Albert Einstein.
But
absolutely.
It is Teddy, by the fact, that, okay, there's a problem out there. We recognize it.
Yep.
Give me a solution.
Yeah.
Or at least an idea of how to make it better, because just, I think we can say this, and if not, I'll get beeped. Bitching doesn't solve anything.
Nope. No,
it's just bitching.
It's whining. Yeah, it's bitching, it's whining. And you know what? Unfortunately, that's very easy to do. That is a very easy emotion to engage in people. Yep. But if you look at most of the rabble-rousers out there, and the other sad thing about cancel culture, which has been going on for a while, I'm not going to pick on Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson and a bunch of other knuckleheads. It's good business. These guys are getting paid.
Very well. And here's a question. What are they really doing for you? Ask yourself the question. Those people that are rattling those sabers and all that, ask yourself the question. What are they doing for you? What are they doing for your cause? How are they solving your problem?
Yep.
I'm not saying the people that are causing the problem are any better, but give them a solution. You don't know. Yep. You don't know. Maybe they, hey, this is broken. Tell me how to fix it. Maybe one of those.
And just so that we're clear, we've kind of focused on an example that kind of focuses on one community. This applies across the board.
Absolutely.
I don't care who you are. If you're going to complain, bring a solution.
An idea.
Boy, and this has shut up so many online arguments.
But later, Texas worked. Has worked. We have been really the, if you will, the model state for our,
no question.
everyone wants to, and I'm, again, not trying to get political and all that, but states with other issues, and I'll just leave it at that. You can pick and choose which state I'm referring
California.
to. Why are there businesses coming here?
No.
Why is there's a reason for it, and while I've been out to California and it's beautiful, I won't say it's not. It is some...
I have lived in California twice in my life.
And there's some beautiful
It is an incredible state, but the people, there's a reason they call it the land of fruits and nuts. I mean, some of the things... I'm going to give you one example as we start to wrap up the show, and this is short-sighted thinking. So... And I get, I am a true conservative. I love what Teddy Roosevelt did in creating our national park system or our national forest system. We do need to protect all of that. And today,
no question about it. I don't disagree.
We plant 3 trees for every tree that gets cut down. But in California, they've taken it so far, they will not let areas clear out the underbrush from forests. Oh, no, that'll harm the environment. No, you know what harms the environment? You get a forest fire and all that underbrush turns into kindling.
And last couple of years...
It's been bad.
Bubba, those things go up real fast.
And it's a tinderbox.
Yep.
It's unfortunately a tinderbox. And there needs to be some common sense instead of the knee-jerk, it's bad for the environment. Well, forest fires are worse. And a lot of these forest fires are started by lightning strikes.
Yep.
And so you can point fingers of blame all over. But I'm back to what are you doing to fix the problem? So cutting fire breaks into forests so the fire doesn't continue to spread. Clearing out the underbrush that's just dead anyway because it can't get any sunlight because the forest. I mean, common sense, people. Exercise a little bit of common sense and focus on what is the underlying goal. And I see my partner in crime is looking at his watch.
As we're getting ready to wrap up the show here, there is a couple things I need to do.
Quick.
And I think this is
Go.
one that all three of us in this room can appreciate. We have a mutual friend that has a birthday today. And if we don't recognize it, I know one individual in this room, largely because we recognize his efforts, helped mold this very young man, our good friend Ben Rangel.
Oh, well, there you
It's
go.
his birthday today.
Hey,
So,
Marine.
you know,
Hope you're listening.
happy birthday. And I know those of y'all can't see, our good friend JP had an incredible influence on his life. And while JP will always refer, I've heard him say the Marine Corps did more for him than he did. I think if you were to ask Ben one-on-one, he would definitely tip his hat to say
So
that.
real fast, got to tell this story. JP was the youngest, might still be the youngest Justice of the Peace in the state of Texas. He ran for that office as a young man. One of the things he created was a program for truant students and getting them on a good path. This is a man that I will always admire because he made a true difference in the life of our young people. Ben Rangel is one of those young men that JP got off a bad path, got him on a better path. Ben wound up going into the Marine Corps, wound up serving in combat, came back with a chest full of ribbons and medals, and he is one of those
He's
great
flourished.
Americans.
Yep.
He's a tax-paying, hard-working American raising his family, but Ben will tell you this, he would not be on that path he is on today without JP. So, my friend, thank you so much.
And Ben,
we admire
happy
you.
birthday.
We honor you. Ben, happy birthday. What are you, like 90, 95? No, sorry, Ben.
Hey,
Ben's a young man.
Yeah, Ben's younger than me.
Oh, yeah, younger than all of us.
Yeah. So, anyways, well, we're wrapping up today. Again, while it's a sad day, milestone that so many great Americans, Texans, Tejanos lost their lives, they paved the way for the great state that we have today in Texas. So, we salute the defenders of the Alamo on today's show. Next week, make sure you join us for more excitement here on Kilroy's Conversation. As always, for Chuck and I, JP, Cassie, and the crew, hoorah and hoorah. We will see you all next week. JP, please take us out.
We are proud to claim the